Imagine cruising through life on autopilot until one moment shatters everything. Today's guest fell asleep at the wheel with cruise control on, crashed her mother's car, and woke up to a second chance at life. That moment changed everything from addiction to awareness, from chaos to clarity. This is her story. Sarah Marie Shoulak is a writer, creative visionary, and storyteller behind the up and coming memoir, a raw exploration of awakening, resilience, and reclaiming your spark. With 7 years of sobriety and a background in art, body painting, and cosplay, Sarah channels creativity as a path to healing and self discovery. She speaks about the moment everything changed when she literally fell asleep at the wheel and how the experience taught her the power of presence and intentional living. Sarah, welcome to Attention is the Currency. Great to have you on the show today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
And Sarah, take us back to that moment. What happened the day of the crash and what was going through your mind afterwards?
I think that the fascinating thing about that crash is that it was absolutely something that I woke up from. But after that, I didn't actually make a lot of the changes that I needed to for a number of years after. So you would think that that kind of jarring experience would smack you awake in a very literal sense. And I think what I was feeling in that moment, because I was so young and naive and still struggling with substance abuse and waves of grief that I couldn't untangle yet. I feel like that should have played a little bit more of a pivotal role. Where I was living in Denver, Colorado. I was attending college out there, and I had headed back up to Minnesota, where my family is from. And I was in Minnesota, and obviously, when you fly in, you don't have a car. So you go to your parents, can I borrow the car? I want to go catch up with people. I want to go visit. It's been a while since I lived here. I want to go see my friends. And I had borrowed my mother's car. I had driven the 45 minutes up to where my friends were having a bonfire and commiserating, but knowing I couldn't stay over there because I had to return the car and she needed it early in the morning. And so I'm visiting with them at this bonfire and realizing I have to pull myself away and go back home. And by this point, it's probably 12:30, getting to be 1 in the morning. And at that time, being as tired from the travel as I was and the hum of the road and the way that it can kind of soothe you to sleep in a really painful way. You're tired, your eyes feel heavy. I was doing everything I could except having a cigarette in my mother's car to, open the window, stick my arm outside. I'm turning the radio on, I'm blaring. I'm trying to sing along just to because I knew I was struggling with it. I knew that I was feeling I was about to fall asleep. And it's a 45-minute excursion. It's a bit of a ways, and it's not through any major cities. It's all kind of rural country Minnesota land that you're driving through. But what's painful about the story, and I feel like what's bittersweet about it, is that I was almost home in that metaphor. They always say that accidents most likely happen within like a mile around your house. And I was in what you would refer to as the home stretch. And I feel like what's really symbolic about this story is that I make the final turn, what became my final turn before the accident. So I make this final turn, and I think I knew at that point this is all straight. It's a straightaway, it's a straight shot. If I just keep this road up, it's just one more turn and then I'm at their house. But it was probably about a 5-minute drive on that stretch. And that's when I made that absolutely horrible decision to say, I know it's a straight shot. I'm just going to put this on cruise control. And it was because I had that kind of ego or boldness that said, this is a smart idea, which I feel like when you're 22, 21, 22, you get a lot of ideas that you think are bold ideas or smart ideas that are absolutely the furthest from either of those. So not only was it on cruise control, but it was set at 55 miles per hour. So it's incredibly fast. That's not a 35-mile or 20-mile residential road. That is nearly a highway speed. And when I was on this road, it was a two-lane road, so one going north, one going south. I'm in the northbound lane. and I set the cruise control on 55 and I just drifted. I just drifted really slowly. I don't remember that part, but from the fact that I walked away, I imagine that I had to drift because if I would have fallen asleep in a jerking motion and if I would have pulled that wheel down, I would have hit the tree line straight on at the 55 miles per hour. So it's only the fact that I kind of just, slowly coasted it across and then I ended up in this ditch. Well, bam, I get hit in the left side of my face with the side curtain airbag of my mom's car. And at this point, I still could have hit any and everything in those ditches. There are electrical boxes, there are posts, there are trees, there's fences, there's stuff there to hit. And what hit me was the airbag and the realization that this car is not in my control anymore, and I have to get it back onto the road, back in control. So I coast back across, which, mind you, both going over and going back, I have to cross the southbound oncoming traffic. And again, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, rural Minnesota, there's not a ton of traffic, but it was that I just need to get back to a safe place. And I didn't really know what else to do except my body saying, get the car back up there. And I did, and I parked it, and I had the cold sweats, and the whole left side of the car is essentially kind of torn off from the mirrors to the side curtain panels of the door and the bumper. And I made the call that nobody wants to make to their parent. And I called my mom and I said, by this point, it is solidly about 2 in the morning. And I said, I've been in an accident. I'm okay. And where I feel like this kind of leads into the memoir and laces in nicely is that it kind of became a running joke in my family. And I think that there is that dark humor to be found in a lot of situations that we deal with as adults, that when trauma happens to us or when things that we can't control happen, to find humor in it, not to be dismissive, not to be patronizing or downplay the magnitude of what's happening. But it became kind of an inside joke in our family that if you wanted a new car, have Sarah drive it because she'll total it and walk
Yeah.
away. So this indestructibility became my brand. And I think that at that time, my mind, I wasn't using my powers for good, right, yet. I
Yeah.
was still very immature and kind of chasing the wrong um, idols.
Yeah.
And so there is a gap between when that accident happened and when my true wake-up call occurred. But as far as the subject of your show and the point that attention is that currency, I feel like the best example I have is when put your attention in a critical moment, which was driving a car when I knew the entire time that I was tired. That was the worst thing I could have done in that moment for sure.
No, 100%. Well, I can relate with around the same time in my life, I actually I fell asleep at the wheel myself. And
Wow.
I was actually very lucky. I was driving, we call it a ute, a dual cab ute, but you'll call it a pickup. And I
Sure.
had an empty tray, and I've fallen asleep in the corner, and because I've just drifted off, and I've gone off the road. I've smacked this piece of concrete, which taken a chunk out of my tire, and I've gone into a spin because I've got an empty tray, and I've
Right.
slammed my foot on the brakes, and of course the engine is stalled because it was a manual, and I've
Mm,
woken up and just slap in the face because I realized that I'd almost killed myself falling asleep on the.
mm,
But I was just around the same age. We think that we're invincible essentially.
hmm.
But
Oh
I was
yeah.
so lucky
I have
because that could
goosebumps.
have, yeah, well, it could have easily gone out worse, and I could have hit that concrete,
Mm,
and the car could have rolled because it was that kind of car.
right.
So
Yeah.
I was so lucky. So I can listen to your story. I'm having flashbacks that because I would have been around I would have been 22, 23 around the same age, and
Yeah.
just yeah, and just driving tired and I was only two corners away from home. So it's the same thing. It's definitely the
Yeah.
statistic is correct. And and I think, yeah, from what you've said, really, although it took you a long time to make the ultimate change, is nothing happens just in an instant, except for that. But real change, it actually takes time. It's yeah, and it's a compounding change. It's not sure you have a life or death situation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the next day you're going to wake up truly the superhero.
Yeah, you don't attribute it to anything, right? There was a little bit of meaning that I inferred when people obviously where I had the accident was very ironically right on the cusp of two different jurisdictions. So I had county officers from two different counties show up, and then obviously my parents are there with the tow truck. So there's this commotion at the end of this story. And as we're getting out of the car, we're kind of clearing out our personal belongings, making sure you have your purse and your phone and what have you. And as I'm getting out of the car, I see along the where the side curtain had exploded, but on the ceiling, there were these little pins that my mother had pushed in, these little pins. And she was newly diagnosed with breast cancer, which I talk a lot through the book, is how her diagnosis and being away for school when she got the diagnosis and how that felt being disconnected from the family during this important time. And so she was recently diagnosed with the breast cancer, and there was a little pink ribbon pin that she had pushed in there with this little angel. And I snagged it and I said, "This is my guardian angel now because this little baby just saved my life." And my mom is like, "No, that's for me for the cancer. It's saving my life." And we had a little disagree. It's mine now because it did save my life most recently. But when everything is kind of a joke, I feel like it didn't have the gravity. It didn't have the impact of if you don't change your ways, whoo, like what's going to happen to you? Because again, we have that young, indestructible personality, that mindset at that time, something not fully formed yet, right? And so by the time I got to where I hit the time to really change, it had to take so much more leverage to get me there because I had already gone through, four near-death experiences by the time I got to what I really consider rock bottom when it came to my drinking and the decisions I would make after having been drinking. And so while other people want to say, marijuana is a gateway drug and things like that. Alcohol was my gateway drug. 100%. There were things that I would not have done had I not had a drink that night or not kept drinking that night or pushed it to limits that I shouldn't have. And it was kind of an experiment in the beginning that I said, let me just take this away and see if my life gets better. Not that I thought that a huge amount would get better. I was just out of options and feeling very desperate in 2017. 2017 is when I got sober. So, by the time that happened, it really took decisions from inside me because it's almost like I couldn't trust these external forces anymore because life was always going to try and kill me. So all of a sudden it took my decision to make a lot of these bigger changes to really make the big ones.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people just justify alcohol because it's so freely available and legal. They don't realize because I just decided one day to stop drinking. I didn't quite have
Mhm.
the issues, but with the drinking. But of course, we all made bad decisions while consuming alcohol. Definitely don't deny that. And you've said that the accident was a metaphor for your life at the time. What did autopilot look like for you before that day?
I think that autopilot before that accident felt more like expectations of family or career, right? It becomes the thing that you wind up the little toy on the back and then or you pull the car, the little race car back and then it zips off in a direction. And I feel like it felt like a bow being pulled back, if we can throw even more analogies in it, but it felt like there was a purpose, there was a mission to it. And so autopilot didn't seem scary or uncomfortable, or it just felt like I was on the right track and I was abiding by the mission. I was going to college, I was getting my master's degree, and I was getting jobs and following through with all these things. But it just never felt like I was out of touch until that accident happened. And then again, it wasn't the fullest of the wake up calls that I could have had in my life, but it was one that really said, there's going to be expensive ramifications, right? A car is not cheap. Repairs are not cheap. I did total it. And that's why that joke became in my family is that I will do one itty bitty little thing. And it's not in the book because it's not near death. It's just stupid. But I actually totaled another car, which is why it's a running joke. I
Yeah.
totaled it before this one. And my parents, it was right when the Toyota Highlander was a brand new vehicle being released. And it was whatever year that was. And it was such a big and cool and beefy, when families love a certain brand of cars and they buy them all from that maker, right? So
Yeah.
we had a Toyota family. It was a really big deal that they got this Toyota Highlander, and I was driving it to school or something or wherever I was headed. Obviously, didn't make it there either. And I was headed, ironically, on the same road because it's the road that leads to my parents' house. This time I'm in the southbound lane, and I realized that I had either forgotten something or I needed to backtrack. So rather than taking my normal turn, I ended up in a parking lot, and all I was trying to do, Daniel, was do a U-turn. I was just trying to turn around and get back out of that parking lot. And in that parking lot with that giant FJ or the Toyota Highlander that I didn't have experience of, knowing its size and knowing where it is and everything, I go to do this U-turn in the parking lot, but it was a parking lot for a mattress company. So they had this big loading dock ramp that was going down, and I didn't really realize because there was a pipe railing that came off. And so in my logic, what I'm thinking is there's this railing that's telling me where the ramp is. So if I clear the the pipe railing, then
Oh,
there's no ramp there. And I kind of felt the car go up a little bit, and I thought it was a curb or something. So I'm cleared the pipe railing, I go up on the curb, and then that front right passenger tire goes down and never comes back up. And I can't go back and I can't go forward. And
oh,
I've totally twisted the front axle. I've blocked the car. I've absolutely locked it in on this ramp. They had to bring a flatbed trailer and lift the car and put it on and take me away. So just stupid and
yeah.
embarrassing things that I
We,
did.
yeah.
And
Well, a lot
so
of it is
totaling
just, yeah.
vehicles with no one involved, no other vehicle.
Oh, it is. Well, I hit a pole in the car park when I was in my first car and took out two doors. So I understand. It's a similar experience, and it's just yeah.
Yeah.
We I think it's learning to be well cautious in life and
Hmm.
because I was doing something. I had a couple of my friends in the car, and we were sort of going around the car park because we were coming out, and I was just sort of cutting near the posts to go down the ramp, and I just went a bit too close and took out the two doors,
Well,
scraped along. So, but yeah, it is silly, but that is life. That's the experiences that we have, and I think well, in the modern day
yeah,
world, we sort of we feel a bit safer than what previous generations would have done, and I guess that's what makes it made us a bit more careless. And
yeah.
how did the experience? Well, you've already sort of talking about that, but shifting relationship with attention and intentionally. So, what was sort of that process to actually move forward to being more intentional?
I think that through those next few years, from when that tragic accident of falling asleep at the wheel happened, and all of the different things that I've gone through since then. So, in that story, I'm living in Colorado. I'm in my undergraduate program. I'm still kind of in the infancy of my educational career. So, by that point, I finish school in Colorado. I've actually studied abroad in Beijing, China for 4 months. I graduate from the university. I decide, because of the person I was dating at the time, I thought the next logical step was to move to Miami because Miami had a good graduate program in the same subject that my undergraduate was in. So it made a great argument to my parents of, oh no, it's not this job for the partner. It's this job because they have a great program. And they did. I wasn't making that up, but I did make sure that my facts, supported my narrative and the choices I wanted to make in life. And so I ended up in Miami. And when you're already dealing with substance abuse and layering over grief, with just masking and stifling things down, man, it's like you drop me in Vegas to drop me in Miami with all those things. And karaoke bars stay open until 4 a.m. And it's just so easy to stay in those bad habits and have people around you who support always having drinks and always having multiple drinks and just that slippery I call it kind of pliable morality where it's just very easy to excuse things like you said, whether it's just how prevalent alcohol is and how common it is. Every happy hour I see, even baby showers, brunches, everything just has alcohol infused into it, sometimes literally. And what I realized was I started being in the back seat. If we keep these vehicle analogies, I was in the back seat of my own life. I started realizing that maybe it was because I had these people-pleasing tendencies. Maybe it was because I felt like I had to be this kumbaya that never rocked a boat or had a voice and chirped up and said, "Hey, I don't think that this should be the way that it is," or "I think differently, and here's why we should do it my way." I might have been confident in certain areas, and so people saw that, but when it came to relationships, I was kind of being walked all over. And I felt like that desire for acceptance and affection from people was more important than my values because I hadn't really established them. I had just kind of not laid any type of foundation for myself. So, what did I have to stand on? How could I feel like I had solid footing to say, this is what I think, and you have to listen to me? And so, the book paints it very honestly about where I was in that situation there at the end, where I was in a very tough relationship where, I could paint him as a demon, but I think we were both made into people we didn't want to be through that relationship. And I did things I'm not proud of, and I'm sure vice versa. But the root was there were so many people intertwined in this situation where, I had all of a sudden this flood of four extra roommates I wasn't expecting because I was kind of pressured into the choice. And I had this full house of chaos literally happening. And I often kind of refer to myself at that point as like a husk of a person. I just felt like a shell. I felt super empty. I felt like life was happening to me. I wasn't a participant in it. And one thing that I think my book is always trying to intertwine and have people find the light within the darkness. And so, even though I can paint that time as this rock bottom and the time where I was drinking the most and making the most bad decisions and really allowing others to guide my future, it was also the time that I was a college professor and I was teaching at a local college and I had taught down in Miami, but at this point I had with this toxic relationship. I had moved up to Orlando, Florida, and I was teaching at Valencia, which is a local community college that we've got here. And to see I might get emotional, but to see the joy and inspiration on those students' faces and to watch them continue to come to school when they're maybe a first generation college student or a single parent or going through their own difficult things, to watch them show up and to watch them commit themselves to something as frivolous as a public speaking class, it felt very metaphorical to give them a voice and to have them get up. And the things that they would share, I didn't normally put a lot of boundaries or parameters on. And some people would get up and be very vulnerable with the class, and some people would come up and just do, the assignment and what was asked of them. But I do feel like they were my glimmer of hope through that dark time that said, you can you can make a better life for yourself because look, we're making better lives for ourselves. And you would think that it would be a stronger influence. You'd think it would be like a parent or a family member or a guidance counselor or some kind of coaching mentor after all the professional development that I'd done that like got through to me. And
Yeah.
here I was pretending that I was the expert in the front of the room, taking inspiration from these students. I'll call them kids, but some of them were older than me. And I feel like that was really, truly that aha moment that made me feel like I need to do this for myself because no one's coming to save me. I need to be accountable. I need to stand up and determine that foundation. And even if I'm late in establishing it, here we are now. And these are the values that I stand for and what I need in my life, whether it's from a partner or the peace of the home environment. And I'm going to make that happen.
Well, we learn more from teaching, and there's so much in what you've just said because we are within other people's expectations and pressures, and like when you if you ask people why they keep doing certain things, they'll go, oh, well, everyone else is doing it.
Right.
That's normally is the way. So it takes a few people to sort of break that cycle, and they go, well now Sarah's not doing that, and Sarah's deciding it with intention, and that's really what I love about these stories and having guests like yourself on the show because it just reflects that people can break the cycle, and it's not just although people because we talk about a hero's journey, but it isn't just one thing. It's
Right.
multiples of things that stack up that compound. And well, it brings because we're going to talk a little about the sobriety as well. Because what did sobriety teach you about yourself that you didn't expect?
This question, well, I'll just be honest. I think it taught me how much of an asshole I was.
No.
Because Because I realized, when you look at that, and I said earlier on this podcast that alcohol was my gateway drug and alcohol made me do these things. And once I had the alcohol, I was making all these poor decisions. They were still my decisions. And I'm not victim blaming myself. I'm just seeing my accountability in the whole picture. And I think that that's how you do have to be honest with yourself. And I also shared before we got started that I watched one of your other episodes where a gentleman talks about, waking up and really being present and being in tune with the decisions that you're making. And I think that that had to be the most important part because it's not like there was a wand, a magic wand that waved and oh, alcohol's out of your life. You're a Disney princess now and the birds are going to come land on your fingers and everything is great and your relationships are perfect. It opened the door for more work to be done. And it's kind of like when your shower is clogged and then you go to clean it out and you've just got this mess that just keeps coming out of, hair and gunk and stuff. It was not pretty. Whether you're in therapy and you consider it the shadow work or whatever, what happens is when the alcohol goes away, you're left with who you really are. And I think that that scares people because they don't like the silence of their own head. They like to mute the voices, they like to be distracted. So, especially when you talk about attention being the currency, think about how many times you are comfortable doing things without multitasking. Whether it's, are you able to fold your laundry without listening to a podcast? Are you able to cook dinner without listening to music? Are there times that you can actually just be present in the physical, the one task that you're doing? So even though I have been sober now 7+ years, and December is going to be 8 one day at a time, but it did not make it wonderful right away. It actually kind of brought up a lot. It got worse before it got better, almost, not worse in terms of, where my mindset was at that rock bottom and the decision to change, but it, there were still some big explosive relationships and times that I had to say, am I being the jerk here? Am I the one who needs to revisit the behaviors and the patterns that I'm doing and that I need to not only be more gentle with myself, but absolutely with other people. And that's not easy to change because when we think about comfort zones and ways that we've always acted just because it feels right or it's how it's been modeled for us, it feels like you're putting on a mask and you're acting like someone else to do something else. But what you have to remember is these are the behaviors that I want. These are the behaviors I'm opting into. These are the behaviors that are going to make me long term the person that I want to be and the person I want to give to others.
Yeah. Well, we're all imperfect humans, aren't we? It's
Yeah.
just, I think that's a really golden takeaway that because people, yeah, and people get stuck in those identities
Mm,
that and they're not releasing them because they are comfortable and they do have to face certain other things. I think we see that all the time that you've got to give away all that who you were to become who you want to be. It's
mhm.
because that's where many people associate sobriety with loss, and you describe it as liberation.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
I found a new version of myself, and I feel like what it really is it is a little bit of cherry picking. It's a little bit of saying, well, I like this about myself, and learning. Okay, well, and a way that I explain it to people when I've shared it before is that I want people to look for patterns, not problems. Because I feel like when people laser in on a problem, they go, oh, that's what it is. My podcast isn't good because my camera's not good, or my life isn't good because my partner's not good, or I could be good if I didn't live in this city. And people want to look and point a finger and have something to blame like a scapegoat and say, this is the reason why my life is not what I want it to be. And that's fine. Obviously, you could say the same thing about money. Like, if you had more money, you could do a lot more things. Like, both things can be true. But
yeah,
when you start to look at patterns, then instead of saying, well, the partner is the problem, what is the pattern behind it? Why do I gravitate towards people who look and act this way? Why did this feel comfortable to me? So, when I looked at my previous self and the things that people loved about me, oh, I was so eccentric when I was drinking. I'd end up in fountains. That was like the thing that I would do is I would get drunk and all of a sudden I'd be like splashing away in a fountain. And I'm like, look at I'm so fun and free. And I was acting very fun and free. But rather than saying, well, now as a sober person, I'm very serious and I'm very stoic and I'm very, unfun. How can I still be fun rather than what I felt was kind of exploitative, where me being in the fountain is them looking over, and then people probably looked over and was like, "This chick in a fountain,"
Yeah.
what I thought they were interpreting it as, and what it probably really was, were vastly different. And so now, as I see myself as a sober person, I can still be fun and silly and take some of those elements, but I'm not going to be a clown or a jester or act for people's enjoyment. I'm not going to be a puppet. So you start to, and that's what I mean, that that process of getting sober and really getting to know yourself is what were those patterns that were good, that I enjoyed, that I really felt like when I was being silly in whatever way, and it could still be jumping in a fountain, but what part of those are because that's really my personality and what I'd like to do, and how much of it is, well, people want me to act this way and I'm going to put on a good show for them, because I don't do that one anymore.
Yeah. Well, actually, think we have more fun not drinking to be because
Yeah. Oh yeah,
it's when
totally.
you're more present and you can enjoy things, and then you really decide what you actually enjoy and not what you
Uh-huh.
think you do. It's yeah. And you've expressed yourself through art, body painting, and performance. How did creativity become part of your healing?
I think art has always been a part of my healing journey. And I don't think that it's in the traditional sense that people think of, like they go to college for art therapy and they're in a room with people who are maybe in a program or a rehab and everybody is drawing their feelings at the same time. I definitely think that those methods and those strategies can work for people. But I feel like the way that art was there for me through a lot of things, especially when I was still in the thick of what I was going through, is that art became the channel that I could put the emotions that I couldn't put to words. And it doesn't mean that I was making a picture of like a dark, scraggly, monster or something like that. I remember most prominently I had just moved yet again for a partner that I was dating. A big trend in my life is a pattern I identify. But I was moving from Miami up to Orlando, and I thought I was moving for the. I had just graduated with my master's degree, and I moved up to Orlando. And I got probably what'll sound like one of the most boring jobs. And my mom, even on the phone, was like, "Are you sure this is what you want to do with your master's degree? You just graduated with your master's degree and you're going to go be an office manager at a tech agency." And I'm like, "Yeah, mom, but they're so cool. I get to stock the beer in the fridge and plan all the events." And it was this cool young people and they were international. Their office was actually based in the UK. We were just the Orlando arm of it. And I thought that it was so cool for all of the reasons that I wanted to look cool and be cool, right? But at the same time, that partner that I had moved up there for was a very short-lived relationship, but in a really uncomfortable one, not like the worst toxic one that led to life changes, but one that I didn't necessarily want to go home to. And I had moved and kind of stayed with him until I bought my house. And so here I was at this new job, and it was an agency, digital agency. So it had all the cool whiteboard tables and the glass walls and the open floor plan and big chalkboards, giant floor to ceiling chalkboards in the offices. And so I was the office manager. I had the keys. I was in charge of the lights. I would turn it on and off. I had the keys to the castle, so to speak. And I remember that I just didn't want to go home. And so I would stay after hours and I would make these big elaborate chalk drawings all over the walls. And it would be, Darth Vader or Link from Legend of Zelda. And I would make these really cool things. And people would come to work in the morning and they're like, "Sarah, this is so cool. Look at this art that she did. She did this for us." And I'm like, "I did it for me because I didn't want to go home for another 4 hours. And now look at it, looks like I did this for work." And so I don't know that it was always so on the nose and overt that like art was therapy and we're drawing our feelings, but it allowed me to get into like a clear-headed meditative state where when I was doing those drawings, I wasn't worried and stressed or drinking or whatever. I was just experiencing the art. And now I can look at that again as looking at the patterns and say, well, it was a form of meditation. It was a form of being present and grounding to say, let's just do this task and hone in on it. But I do feel like in a bittersweet way, I do make the best art when my life is going the worst.
Yeah, well, it was your coping way, and I think it ties back in for everything else that uh, we tend to we stay with people, we do things that we were expected to do, and it's sort of and you're released all that, and that's where you are now. You're in the better space, and you're telling the story for everyone else, which does bring me to your book. What Tell us about your book. One question that I always like to note in here is how you want your book to be used. For example, do you see it as a manual for people to carry around? Do you see it as something that somebody buys a box and hands out to their friends because they've got to read the story, or is it a book that you buy and then you lend? There's always a purpose.
I it was on a different podcast, but I told my friend that I almost want to do anti-marketing for the book because I love my mother. She's been an incredible inspiration in my life through her work ethic and just instilling a lot of good values in me from a young age. But when I hear her and I know how proud she is, and she wants to be like, everyone, Sarah wrote a book, go out and buy it. I want to really put, some caveats on that. Like, it's not a cookbook. It's
Yeah.
not a coloring book. It's not the kind of book that everyone may enjoy. And actually, spoilers, but the first line of the book is Welcome to an Uncomfortable Book, because I want people to understand the gravity of the stories that I share, but also offer kind of a unilateral trigger warning that if you are the type of person who is still working through a lot of your trauma, take this book slowly, chip away at it. It's not the kind of thing you're going to pick up and binge right through. Um, that might be the best way to get through it is rip the band-aid off and just get through it and then decompress. But I am honest. I am very, transparent with a lot of things that I share, and they're heavy topics. And I try not to make it graphic. I don't go into huge details when I mention things like traumas that I've been through. I try and respect the fact that anybody and my grandma might be reading this someday. So I do try and touch on the main things that I went through without making people go through it with me, if that makes sense. And in terms of how I would want it to be received and used, I do still feel like there are so many people on their journeys, like you said, where everybody else is doing it. I don't really see people doing anything different, so how would I know anything different? And a lot of times, what we do here is kind of an encouragement to older people to say things like, oh, you're never too old to follow your dreams. So and so wrote their book or got their movie at 50, do whatever you want. And I'm kind of, while I still can be a younger person and say, you're never too young for this wake-up call, or you're never too young for, sorry, I moved and I got blurry. But you're never too young for a wake-up call, and you're never too young to look at something and say, is something off in my life or does it need to change? And that's not a prescription. That's not me with like some advocacy saying we're anti-alcohol and get this out of your life. It's to say, are you checking in with yourself regularly? That's it. Because that's maybe my whole mission in life. And the way I say it is I want you to get better, not bitter, because I think that I ended up with such rage. And in my younger years, I did a lot of mixed martial arts. And I feel like when I had those as my coping mechanisms, that I could punch people or I could drink. And then I've taken both of those away. And now I'm like, oh, I can't punch people and I can't drink. What do I do? I have meditation and gratitude. Great, let's figure out how that works. It's definitely a new existence. Um, but I think that it shows people that you can calm those voices, and whether it's just as simple as road rage or the way that you handle feedback and conflict, I feel like people could use a little de-escalation these days, and people could find ways to look at themselves and say, my mother would phrase it as being directionally correct. It doesn't mean that you're on the right path, so to speak, but are you headed in the right direction to where you would like to be? And so I think that that's just a point that I want people to keep with them, because just like me, you would think that it would have happened when I fell asleep at the wheel and was shocked awake. You would think that was the aha moment, but it actually took years later for that seed to actually come to fruition. So if my book is only the seed, and that, 7 years down the road they change their lives, I'll still consider that a win.
Oh, it's yeah. Well, it's not too early, not too late to start.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just right.
Because well, I know that if we learned a lot of these lessons a lot earlier in life, things would be a lot different nowadays. It's always the way. Hindsight's that 2020 as well.
Yeah. But
Uh,
you also have to be ready to receive it, because I do come from a family of alcoholism. It's not like I never saw anyone struggle with alcohol. And I watched family members smoked and then I still chose to smoke cigarettes. So you would think that exposure to these things would be so off-putting and oh, I'll never have my life be like that. And watching people go through these extreme examples of alcoholism that I would never want that for myself. But then it still becomes so easy to just smooth into your life. And I also really think that because I was so successful, which I say in air quotes because I'm not trying to humble brag here, but because I was hitting these milestones of graduating from college, buying a house, doing what people thought, were the steps to be successful, how could you criticize me? How could you criticize anything else I'm doing because I'm succeeding? I'm doing it right. And you're over here not. So how could you say that I'm drinking too much? And so I feel like there is that ego involved as well, that you have to be in the place where it always has to come from you with making changes.
it's that total accountability of everything. Because it's a full picture. I think we focus a lot on those on careers and everything like that and education, but yeah, it's really a very small part of life compared to the overall picture.
Oh, yeah.
And, and you speak about the importance of being present in your life, and what does that look like day to day now?
I think day to day being present in my life has a lot more ritual involved than I had before. And maybe that is discovering that I have a little bit of OCD thanks to my lovely therapist, but really it's intention. And I feel like attention is very similar to intention, that you can't be intentional if you're not paying attention. So I feel like those are so deeply intertwined, but by having ritual, and by having things that you do with a purpose, then it ties into your purpose and your purpose in life and your mission that you're going for. And I was actually just today making a list that I think I might end up offering my newsletter list as a free download kind of thing, but it was a list of things that don't look like self-care that are self-care. And whether it's making overnight oats for myself so that in the morning I have breakfast ready and things like that, I called it a yummy love note to myself, where little things like that, where you're kind of putting the breadcrumbs down of happiness and joy. And what I feel like people don't see these days is how this microwave culture of everything I have is right here and it's accessible and it's immediate and I never have to wait for anything. We're also acting that way with results within ourselves. And that's why we want a pill, or I want to go get hypnotized, or I want to go have something that if I take alcohol in my life, I want it to be an overnight change where everything in my life is just better. And I feel like in my day to day being present is reminding myself, just like sobriety. The only reason why I've been sober for 7 years is every day I did a little not drinking. And so, kind of like a Snapchat streak, I want people to get obsessed with that little bit of good, because sometimes that's all you have to cling to. And not to be macabre or have so many, dark thoughts, but there are times that even I, going through all of this, have that whoosh, whether it's depression or just being in a funk or getting in a rut and not really being able to kind of get back up and look over and say, oh yeah, there's more to the horizon. Just, have patience. So I feel like having these little routines and having these little things that I do for myself that might feel frivolous, it's not because it's going to get me likes or followers. I'm not recording it. I'm not doing anything like that. It's just for me and it's just to line this up. I feel like that is a form of self-care and being present, because otherwise, you're just a zombie. You're just kind of going through life and having it happen to you.
That's perfect. Well, it's the compounding, and you've answered that second last question around practical steps and strategies for the listeners at home, and so that's perfect. So Sarah, we'll move to the closing question, our signature
Yeah.
close. And Sarah, if attention is the currency, what should people stop wasting it on and start investing it in?
Well, it's hard because I want to be delicate because there is so much negative news in both of our countries. It's all around the world. The whole
Very
world is
global,
kind of
yes.
hot right now. So it is tricky to do this. But when you say that attention is the currency, and what you can stop spending it on is negative content. And that's really delicate because we could unpack what I mean by negative. And I think what I really mean is just know your limit of when enough is enough, because it's good to be well informed. It's good to read up on what happens. Obviously, there are tragedies that are happening, whether it's a bombing or a shooting or an accident or things like that. And there are horrible atrocities happening. But just imagine if that was your whole feed, right? And you're just sitting there, and it could be the news, it could be social media, it could be your highlight reel of all the traumas and all of the negative things in your life. And that is so risky when that is what's on repeat. And so if attention is the currency, start investing it in positive influences. And notice that I'm not saying positive content where it's just like a whole bunch of kittens, although that I'm sure that would change your life in magnificent ways.
Adorable.
But really, what does positive content look like to you? Maybe it's people who are making changes like we're talking about that inspire you. And it's not so much fluffy and frivolous positive content that's rose-tinted glasses and it's pretending like things aren't happening, but maybe it's people that are going through healing journeys that are inspiring you and saying, wow, this gives me hope. And to kind of put this into a practical example, I make a lot of art. We've shared that throughout this podcast, and a lot of my art takes a good amount of time. And I'll often put on something that I can binge, like Netflix or something, or Disney Plus, and I'll put it on while I'm doing my art. And usually, what I've noticed is I'm not even watching the visual, I'm just listening to it because it'll be something like The Simpsons, where after a certain point, it's all just voice acting, and you can kind of hear the shows like it's a radio show. But I realized what I started replacing binging shows with is like affirmations and mantras and music that reinforces these things. And that simple change has even, I've seen, myself be calmer, less anxious in the last week or so of doing that. Um, and that's just a little change. So I wouldn't really see myself as saying like Simpsons content or that kind of content is negative or bad or traumatic or anything like that, but just using that time more productively and using it for more positive influences is going to help anyone, no matter where you are.
That's perfect. I always like to have a good laugh in the day. That's so I
Oh,
always,
yeah. Yeah, that too.
especially on a very heavy day. So the Simpsons, well, the classic Simpsons are always the best. But Sarah Marie Shoulak reminds us that we don't need a near-death experience to wake up. Her story is a call to be present, to pay attention to what matters before life forces us to. You can follow her work and journey toward the release of a new book. Her socials and her website will be in the description. And if this episode inspired you to reclaim your focus, share it with someone who needs a reminder. And it's never too late or it's never too early to wake up and make a big change in your make a compounding change in your life and for all the better. Thank you again, Sarah. Great to have you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.